Hello, and welcome to the Cultivating Confidence podcast. I am your host, Dr. Nicole Grams. I am a life coach who specializes in anxiety, health, and human design. And I also happen to be a functional medicine pharmacist. This podcast is a compilation of conversations that I've had with clients and colleagues. So listen in as we explore the mind, body, and soul's confidence in its many forms. All right. So I'm just going to dive in. I hope everyone's doing well today. I'm doing pretty amazing, and I'm pretty excited to dive into this topic that's a little bit deeper than last week. What our real problems are. And wouldn't that be nice to figure that out, right? I think I'm going to start doing these with sort of an opening grounding breath, if that's okay. So get comfy if you're sitting or laying down. Just close your eyes if it feels comfortable for you. Just feel your feet on the floor or the ground, or, just the weight of your body on whatever it is you're laying on. If you're laying down, feel yourself connect to the ground and center your focus on your body and what's happening in your body. Take a deep breath. Let it go. And just notice if any part of your body is drawing your attention. So if there's some sort of ache or itch or something like that, just breathe into that space and just center for a second. And then if it feels comfortable, keep your eyes closed, but bring your attention to the room outside of you, around you. Is it warm? Is it cool? Are there noises that you can hear? Can you hear people outside? Something like that. Just notice. When you're ready, take one last breath and let it out and come back to the room. Take your time. Open your eyes. All right. Let's do this. All right. So what our real problems are. Now, I'm going to give you as much information as I can, and I'm, as always, open to having a conversation about it if you disagree with me, because sometimes these are topics that are like, I don't get this yet. So let me know if it's something that's really kind of triggering for you, because I've been there. This whole process is crazy sometimes. So yeah, allow yourself to feel and just be honest with yourself. If you can't be honest with me, although I'd love it if you're honest with me as well, just so I can help guide you through. So let's think about the problems that we have. Start by thinking about a minor problem that you might have, something that might be annoying you sometimes. It can be easier to start with a smaller thing to sort of grasp the concepts that we're going to talk about today. And some of you who I've worked with before or are familiar with this work already know this, but the problem that's bothering you is not the actual thing itself. It's not the circumstance that's happening. It is more likely to be your thoughts about the circumstance or about the thing that's going on that's bothering you. So it's not a problem until you think that it's a problem, until you make it mean that it's a problem. So like there's literally nothing that is a problem. It might sound like I'm saying like the same thing over and over again, but it's like, I know some of you can relate, but it's a concept that really kind of blew my mind at first. And it still sometimes is like, oh, that's really it, huh? It's just my own brain again. So for instance, some of the problems that we have, I know that I and my friends, especially even growing up, we'd complain about our first world problems. So it might be something like, oh, the internet is slow, or the internet glitched, right? First world problem. Like, oh, I can't find the charger for my phone. Oh, I misplaced something in my, house or whatever. These are not problems that are life altering, and putting them into perspective can really snap you back into reality. And when you realize that it's a first world problem that you're having, for example, or some people call them like rich people problems, like, oh, I don't have a hot tub, but the cover of my hot tub ripped or something like that. Like those are not problems. in the world, right? They can seem like really big issues, but they're not necessarily true. Another issue that we might have is what we're focusing on. So a lot of us spend a lot of time focusing on the problem itself instead of looking for solutions. And it's honestly just how most of us are taught. It's to focus on what's wrong, to focus on how we're feeling shamed or embarrassed, or, what a failure we are. And our own brains kind of highlight how inadequate we are. And it's not focused on learning something new or that we are learning something new. It's just focused on like how I can't do it. We kind of focus on that and then expect this like miraculous, magically, figured out solution to whatever problem, right? Instead of like accepting where we're at and then looking forward, instead of saying like, oh, what went wrong? Why are we having this problem? We want to focus more on, okay, here's what happened. How do we figure out how to make sure that it doesn't happen in the future? Like, how do we solve for this? Or like, if you're trying to figure out a new process, like, when I was starting this business, I had to figure out, social media and some advertising things. So a lot of my energy at the beginning was focused on, okay, I don't know how to do this. I'm going to focus all my energy on how I don't know how to do this, how this is so hard. And I keep telling myself this story about how this is impossible, right? But it's a lot more useful to take that and switch it around, ask better questions. So I don't know how to do this might be a fact, but it's just a thought that I'm having. And it's not a useful thought at that. It's just something that's helping to keep me in my safe bubble. So it's our brain trying to keep us from experiencing new things, because our brain wants to stay in this comfort zone more than it wants to be uncomfortable in something new that we might fail at, or even just feels uncomfortable, because a lot of us have been living in this like anxiety world for months and months and years, even sometimes. And it wants to stay in what's familiar. It wants to keep giving you the thoughts that kept you, it wants to keep you in a place where it knows what to predict. We want our environment to be predictable, and we know what anxiety feels like. We know how to respond to it. We know how it feels. It's not a scary feeling. It's not a helpful feeling. It's not something that we want to be experiencing, but especially if we're not allowing ourselves joy, for example, like joy is such a terrifying emotion when you really lean into it. There's fleeting moments, but then there's so many people that I talk to that are like, oh, well, I'm feeling really good, but I'm just waiting for something to drop. Like, why are we looking for the problems? But yeah, anyway, that's just an example of what our problems really are. Is like we are looking for the things that are wrong in our lives, right? So we're focusing on what the problem is or what the problem will be instead of how amazing it could be, how we can figure it out, how smart we are, how amazingly beautiful we are. My coach taught me a long time ago. One of the first things that she teaches everybody is to kind of lean on the phrase, so what? So something happened to me, this other thing happened to me, all this stuff is, happening to me. So what? What's the problem? And a lot of times, even just asking yourself that can be empowering, because it's like, oh, well, that's not really that big of a deal. So what? So there's traffic on my way to work. So what? Right? We were always going to be late. We were just wrong about the fact that we were going to get there on time. That's something that I that I have experienced a couple of times recently. I don't know if any of you can relate, but yeah, put it into focus of, so what? What's the big deal about it? And that is a very useful phrase that can help us pick apart what our thoughts are about it, what we're making it mean, and figure out what our thoughts are and what our feelings are, and really separate them out. And even what we're doing, like, so what? So what did I start doing then? We can start sort of laying it out. And once we kind of recognize that pattern, we can have some power over it. So once we recognize that, the outer world is all a circumstance, we can really start to understand that we have a lot more power over our emotions than we ever thought possible. Because it's not necessarily the fly that's buzzing around the room that is in charge of our emotions and our feelings and our, frustration, for example. Some days there might be flies buzzing around and they're not a problem at all. Maybe you don't even notice them necessarily. But if you're trying to focus on something, like if you're sitting at your desk working on a computer, trying to type something up, and then this fly keeps buzzing around, it's like you can choose most of us are going to sit in the default brain of, oh my God, this is so annoying, right? If that's what we've been thinking about flies for forever, right? And this is a really small example that seems like it's nothing, but again, those of you who've worked with me before, you can find the biggest breakthrough moments in those tiny things that happen in your life. So that's where coaching can be so powerful, because it's usually the things that people will say, oh, well, this happened, but it wasn't, whatever, it was annoying, but like, just brush it off because it's not a big deal. But like, that's where it's so easy to see where your brain is going, what path your brain is going down, because it's so easy to see that it's a thought that's causing it. And then you can really see how it applies to a bigger thing that feels true to you. So another example might be, I gained 10 pounds over the holidays, right? Like, that's not necessarily a problem unless you make it a problem, right? Weight is a circumstance. How much you weigh is a circumstance. And it's only one tiny piece of circumstance in your overall health, right? It could be that, a coworker didn't get their part of the project done, and you can choose to show up with a lot of negative thoughts about them, or you can say, all right, well, this happened. Where do we go from here? How do we get this done? And it's really about figuring out what you want and how you want to show up in these circumstances. How do you want to be thinking about the problems? And if you're showing up exactly how you want to, like if your coworker doesn't get something done, are you turning into this raging, like, anger ball of fury at them? Or are you showing up? Maybe that's how you want to show up. And if it is, cool. Like, there's no work that needs to be done. If raging all day long is how you want to live your life, good. We're good. Yeah. Right. Exactly. But if you get triggered by that regularly, for example, and you want to show up differently, if it is a problem for you in the way that you're thinking that, I want to show up as a different person, because clearly showing up with all this rage is not helpful. So yeah, the second part of it, after we kind of realize that, it's our thoughts causing the problems, we want to figure out what we actually want. Once you take a back seat, and this is something that a lot of us call observer mode, just observe what you're doing and evaluate whether you're doing the things that you want to be doing. How do you want to show up? What do you want to feel when this circumstance comes up again, or another similar circumstance, or even a circumstance that's not even anything like it, right? A lot of our thought loops can apply to so many different things. So paying attention to where your brain brings you, what path your brain brings you down, that's going to be where our power comes first, is observing and understanding what's happening. Because if we're just allowing our thoughts to be kept in the dark in the basement, it's kind of like mold. They will get bigger. They will be toxic for you, right? And you can't necessarily see them because you've shut them out. You don't want to have moldy thoughts going around. You want to clear all that out and see what's going on and clean it out and have it be in a place where you're showing up the way you want to. Once you've decided how you want to show up, I kind of mix these two together, but evaluate like how you're showing up and what you're actually doing. So are you blowing up and yelling? Are you becoming this furious, raging ball of fury? Or are you showing up exactly how you want to? So if you think that, you know, if you think certain thoughts about a circumstance that you're not aware of over and over and over again, you're probably going to continue to think those thoughts, and you're probably going to continue to show up in a way that's not necessarily helpful for you. And then when you see how you're showing up and you choose differently, life kind of starts to flow a little bit better. There's a lot less frustration, there's a lot less anger, there's a lot less anxiety when you realize that, you can't necessarily control everything, and how am I going to show up in this? I don't know. I know a couple of you have probably read the book Loving What Is by Byron Katie, and I might have mentioned it last week, but that's honestly the book that I would start with. If there's one thing that you do, is read that book. In there, she talks about the questions that we talked about last week, is it true? Can you absolutely know it's true? Who would you be without this thought? How do you act with this thought? Those sorts of things. But in that book, she really breaks down things that are my business, things that are your business, and things that are God's business. And I'll use the word God just because she used that herself. You can call it whatever you want. You can call it spirit. You can call it, universal energy. You can call it whatever, the universe's business. You can call it whatever you want. But are you staying in your business? Because most of our problems come when we're stepping into other people's business and we're trying to run their life. And we'll talk about something called the manual soon, probably. But we all have an idea of how everything else should run around us, right? And the second it doesn't work that way, that's when we start to feel negative emotions because we're trying to control what we cannot control. So if you're staying in your business, for me, that means examining how I'm showing up, examining what my thoughts are and what my feelings are, and how I want to live my life. That's my business. Now, for you, my business is, not your business. And you might have an opinion on what I'm doing with my life, but that's the only time that that's a problem is when you're stepping into someone else's business and trying to kind of run their life for them. And even in the example of the fly buzzing around the office, you're trying to control something that is not within your control. I mean, you might be able to get a swatter and kill it, but like, say you don't have one, or say you can't do that. Like, you're trying to control the circumstances around you. Just doesn't work long term most of the time. If we're able to change the circumstance and not do the thought work, go for it. If you're trying to change someone else and how they're responding, it's not going to work. And it's only going to cause you a lot of stress, a lot of drama that is not going to help you long term. Right. So I kind of touched on, my business is being in charge of my own emotions, processing what I'm in charge of. And that's where the power kind of comes, because you have to be able to give yourself space to feel everything that you're feeling. Like, I am not about just switching to a different thought. I'm all about understanding with compassion where you are right now, because adding blame and shame and embarrassment on top of what you're feeling is never helpful. If you're already feeling a negative emotion, we don't want to blame and shame ourselves into a worse feeling situation. We just want to give ourselves space and give ourselves compassion, and think about, like, if you had a best friend that was in this circumstance, in the same circumstance that you are, feeling exactly how you are, how would you treat them? How would you show up for them? Because we somehow hold ourselves to this unachievable standard, and we think that we should be so much better than what we are always. But we don't usually think that everybody else should be better than what they are, because they haven't lived through it. They haven't, had to learn it yet. but we think, the second we hear something, it should be, mastered. That's just not how it works. The last part of this is really changing your story that you're telling yourself about it. And we kind of have given some examples of this. So like the guy cutting you off in traffic, again, changing the story that you're telling yourself, changing the thoughts that you're having and showing up in the way that you want to in order to get through and not make it a problem. Any questions, thoughts? Does anyone disagree with what I have to say? Bring it on.
I think the "so what" really, like, stuck out. Like, I mean, you and I have worked together for months now, and I don't recall that ever being said, and that really resonated
Mm,
with me.
interesting, because I feel like I say it to everyone all the time.
You
So
do,
that's
and, like, now that, like,
ah,
I'm thinking about it, like, I've recognized that you've said it to me in the past, but I've never put thought behind it like you did tonight, and I was
right.
like, "Wow, that."
Yeah. And it can be such a powerful statement to even just ask yourself, like, oh my gosh, I have all this drama. So what?
Yeah.
I saw a hand. Feel free to unmute yourself.
So my thing tonight that resonated with me was the fact that if I looked at the situation like it was one of my best friends,
Mm-hmm.
how I would be with them. And it solidifies a lot of stuff I've been struggling with lately
Mm-hmm.
and, and how I'm showing up for myself
Yeah.
and how I should be showing up for myself.
That's a really good point that I didn't specifically write in here. I talked about how we're showing up for everything else. We got to talk about ourselves and the relationship that we're having with ourselves. And that's why that's one of the pillars that, well, I guess it's kind of in several of the pillars that I coach on, but talking about how you're showing up for yourself is so important because that's probably the most important thing that you can do. Because sometimes you're beating the crap out of yourself without really realizing it, just because those are the thoughts that you've had over and over and over and over again. And we all have inner mean girls that are just there being real bitchy all the time. Like, let me tell you. But yeah, how are you showing up for yourself when you are in a particularly difficult point in your life? And that can mean so many different things, but are you being kind to yourself? And if it was a good friend, what would you tell them? How would you treat them? And it's something that I found pretty fascinating, but also kind of sad when we, especially as women, when we talk about our friends doing something, like if we go in and like talk about our friend and how they should get a raise, we are there, we got their back, we are, fighting for them to get a $5 raise instead of this, 50-cent raise. Like we needed 10 times everything for all of the people that we love because they're so amazing. But how are we showing up for ourselves in that situation? We're like, well, I kind of do a good job, I guess. Ugh. Like, hold on. No. Who else is going to see this same situation and see it completely differently? Like, we need to start showing up for ourselves and believing in ourselves, because if nobody, if we don't believe in ourselves, why should anybody else? And I think a lot of us kind of rely on external validation for a lot of things that we don't necessarily need. We need to feel like we're doing a good job. Yeah, it's nice to hear that from other people, but like if you stepped back and objectively looked at what you're doing for yourself in your life, are you showing up the way you want to? And if so, awesome. You're doing the best that you possibly can, and that's amazing. Even when it doesn't feel like you're doing the best that you possibly can. And everybody is showing up and doing the best that they possibly can in every single situation. And even when it seems like we're not, if we really dig deep into the thoughts about how we're thinking, that's when we start to discover, oh, well, my brain is telling me that this is a scary thing, that I should avoid this. Like if I get an email saying, hey, can you check this? I'm going to put this up for you or whatever. Like, oh, no, we got to go. Suddenly the laundry is way more important, right? No, stop that. You're doing the best that you possibly can. But yeah, I don't know if that made sense, but yeah, and there's sort of this relationship of this boss employee relationship that we have with ourselves as well. Sometimes of, are you being a good boss and are you being a good employee for yourself? So you have to be a good boss for yourself and understand that, you need rest. You can't just put your nose to the grindstone and go, 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 go. And especially, and we'll talk about this more later when we get into a little bit of the human design side, there are some of us who need a lot more rest than other people. That's just how we're designed. And the society basically tells us that the best way to be productive is to go, 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 and to constantly be working, to constantly be hustling, to constantly be doing things. And that's great for part of the population. And that might be a majority of the population. If they're doing something that they love, they can do that all day long. That's not all of us. A lot of us need a lot more rest than we're giving ourselves credit for. And it's not even just rest, physical rest, it's relaxation, letting ourselves just not think about things. We need to be showing up for ourselves in that way too. Give yourself space.
Nicole, are you gonna go into like the thoughts that you are molded as a child, like at some point? Because I think for me personally, like it's what you were raised and the mantra that like were taught growing up that a lot of times you revert back to and think it's got to be done this certain way or it's not going to get done. You know what I mean?
Right, right. Yeah, no, there's actual evidence, scientific evidence that, the default brain, the core beliefs that we have are formed before age 7. Like not that we're a hopeless case after age 7. Far from it, actually. But our core beliefs are solidified as how we exist in the world by the time we're 7. We know whether, like looking at our parents, we know whether, like, we don't consciously know it, but like whether we are valued, whether we are of value in this world, whether we're seen as a problem, whether we are, the ones that have to control everybody else's emotions so we stay safe. And that's like, for us as adults, we can look at our inner child and see those moments where, sometimes, a lot of times our parents probably don't even realize that this is what is happening, right? And there's a certain point where you realize that, we looked up at our parents as if they knew all of the things and, this is how the world existed. And it's not until many of us step out into like college and get away from home that we're finally like, holy crap, this isn't how the rest of the world thinks. Like, it can be so crazy how different thoughts are from different families even. And within the same family, because sometimes there's a dynamic of one sibling, is the star child and the other one is just, worthless. And then it's this constant like, well, I'm the black sheep. I've always been the black sheep sort of feeling that can happen sometimes. Or, I always, got things done. I, look for the praise from other people instead of looking for my own praise. And there've been some TikToks that have been absolutely spot on about this topic lately. I should try to find them again. But it's really like, okay, well, if you're favoring one child over another, you're doing no one a service, right? You're doing everyone a disservice by, okay, well, this one's always going to look out for your approval in order to do things. This one is going to be constantly seeking out your approval because you've ignored them. Yeah, it's a crazy, crazy world that gets formed so young in our minds, and it can be really hard to break those cycles, and it can be really painful to examine those core wounds that we have inside. Yeah. Do you have
Yeah, and I think
Go ahead.
it even applies to like the inner mean girl. You know what I mean? Like how
Mhm.
you judge yourself and others and all of the things based off of like, the upbringing you've had, what's been acceptable in your household growing up, or,
Right.
vice versa or whatever. Like
Right.
I think that's so important. For me, that's what resonated the most. Like
Mhm.
just
Yeah. Do you have an
eliminating that.
example that you can think of like a belief that you have worked on?
Not off the top of my head. I mean, just mm-mm. No.
We've worked on a lot
Yeah, I
together,
mean,
for sure. Yeah. I mean, I think it's kind of the human condition to find the way that we are inadequate, right? It almost always comes down to, well, I'm not worthy of, feeling good. I'm not worthy of unless I do this, this, and this, right? Like if you grew up in a household where, if you're sitting on the couch, you're called lazy all day, then you're going to think that your worth is tied up in doing something, like physically being active and doing something productive,
yeah,
not
I was
just.
gonna say like work ethic, like that resonates
Mhm.
because I struggle with like now, like when people don't show up to work or when, they're constantly late or are lazy on the job. And like, I'm judging them because like I grew up in a household where it was like, you go to work, you go to school, you
Mhm.
better be running 105 fever or, like you just did it. And it,
Right.
nobody, it's just what we did or what my parents did,
Yeah. And if you're
and
not
now
doing
it's
that, then you're
like,
lazy, right?
yes, like now it's like, oh, wait a minute, that person really might have this going on, or
Mhm.
like you said, if it was my best friend, what would I tell her if she called in and had a stomach bug? I'd be like, go lay down, take some ginger ale or whatever, like take a day,
Yeah.
rest.
And like now is not the time to do 6 loads of laundry.
Yeah, exactly. Like go sit down. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Sit down and take care of yourself. Show up for yourself the way that you would show up for a friend. Exactly that. Yeah. I mean, I even think about sometimes like telling kids to be careful. And I mean, I was told this a lot, like, oh, be careful, you're gonna, get hurt. Those sorts of things can be undermining almost because you're not learning how to succeed at something. You're learning how to stay small. You're learning how to stay safe in not being allowed to go out and, play and take risks and fall down and get hurt and learn from that, right? We're taught like, oh, nope, it's not safe to do that. I have to stay in my little bubble where I know it's safe. And that is so hard to get through as an adult, to like realize that just because it looks a little bit scary doesn't mean it actually is. And when we break it down, oftentimes it's just how we think we're going to feel. When like we'll have a whole day talking about failure and how that's all made up, guys. Like, newsflash, like, spoiler alert, failure's not a real thing until we make it a thing. But we're all afraid of failure. We're afraid of putting ourselves out there. We're afraid of judgment because we think it's unsafe in some way. Yeah, it's powerful work that all of you are doing. So, congratulations for taking these steps for yourself. even if it's just in these sessions, like this is some powerful stuff that most people are not brave enough to take the step and do, because it is scary. It is terrifying. And just because I'm not calling you out individually one-on-one and making you come up and scream out loud on a stage, I know I've told some of you this story, but like it can be super cathartic to do that, but it's also very uncomfortable, right? But it's not unsafe. And there can be a lot of growing by doing that and sharing your story and being vulnerable in front of people. All right. I think I'm going to wrap up here unless anyone has anything else they want to add. Thank you for being here tonight. And for those of you who are watching this on replay, thank you for being here later. And I hope that this was helpful. Take care, everyone. Thank you for being here. I love you all. Thank you for taking the time to listen in today. Many of you will be able to take the ideas that you've heard and apply them in your daily life, and that's really all you need. That's amazing. But for those of you who could use a little one-on-one help with how to make these things actually work for you in your real life, please reach out. The link to schedule a consult with me is in the show notes. You don't have to do this alone. See you soon.